Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Mr. Andrew Mamedo joins us now. He is the country director for ActionAid Nigeria. Good morning. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you, Chamberlain, for having me. Thank you.
Are you surprised about the turnout of this protest? I mean, the narrative coming through from the Council of States.
Yeah, thank you very much. Definitely, I'm not surprised. So.
Oh, you were one of those who say, well, you kind of saw this coming?
Yeah, of course. I think if you've noticed, whenever there's an incident like this, a Council of State meeting is always called. So if you go to NSAS, immediately after the NSAS, there's a Council of Meeting. So it's a way of the government trying to get validation. Say, okay, we've got not just the government of the day, but other leaders of the country still in support. So it's a way of saying, oh, Nigerians, we're not just here alone. Even past leaders, the Council of States, those that are relevant in that sense, are backing us. Well, how would you explain the vote of confidence? I think that's pushing it.
What about, do you think that position of the Council of State is valid in terms of whether or not it's useful, it's functional?
I think it's functional, but the question is, do they serve the purpose of being the conscience of the country? I think that should be the fundamental question. If they exist just for advisory purpose. So technically, the president is not at will to take whatever comes from there. So it's just advisory purpose.
Okay,
but
so
are they able to do that and actually stand as a voice of the citizens?
So that might have been the broad perspective. But what about the factors that they may have, that they considered to arrive at that position? For instance, the part where the NSA had the briefing and pointed out that there were some foreign elements and there were funds that were, according to them, sponsored or donated to ensure that this protest holds. To them, they interpreted that as though, look, these guys were actually doing this to foment trouble and destabilize the country.
Okay, so I think the fundamental question we need to answer is, and the government has not answered that. We all agree that protest is legitimate. So when you say funding of protest, what does that mean? So if you are funding a legitimate cause, is that against the law? The answer is no. So if people are going out for protest and I decide to buy them food, Nigerians are hungry, so I decided to buy them food and I decided to give them water. Some commissioner of police, Lagos, they gave the protesters water. So that's funding the protest. So if it's a legitimate cause and you are funding it, then what is the problem? What is the challenge with that? We need to answer that question.
But if I can just ask off the top of my head, for instance, do you need to, if a protest is organic and I feel really low and frustrated, isn't it supposed to be just organic? I hit the streets, I make my mind, bright my mind, and then, I move on from there. Do I have to be funded to go protest?
Yes and no. So yes and no, because when you have 133 million Nigerians living in multidimensional poverty, when you have some days up to 20 million Nigerians going to bed without food, they would want to protest ordinarily. So with the NSA's presentation, probably what he would have told us is, what is the proportion of those that are calling for change in government and those that are genuinely saying we are hungry? So what is the proportion? So I'm not ruling it out. I'm not saying that there might not be possibility.
So where do we draw the line?
So where you draw the line is you have to go to the root cause of the problem. You need to deal with the root cause of the problem. So let's not have protests. Let's do things that will make people not come to the streets. So it's not about restricting protests. It's not about pushing protests to the stadium or to a particular location. It's about dealing with the fundamentals that would make protests not occur. That is the bottom line. That's what we need to focus on.
Well, protests, I mean, in a democracy, some people will say protests are inevitable and they are a fundamental part of people's rights. And people can protest over anything, even in the so-called advanced democracies. We see, young people, we saw what Greta Thunberg did, to bring attention to climate action. Initially, it was a one student protest, and then she got the attention of her classmates, and it grew from there. So even in places that are settled socially, economically, welfare. There are other issues there are other concerns that will eventually come up. However, in a fragile democracy as ours, there are so many issues to protest about, and more so in an economy where things are now dire. We've been seeing the hardship which we're currently facing today has been long foretold. There have been many plans to try and avert it, but even to take those steps, we knew that those plans were averted, so to speak. Try to save, no, we can save by ourselves. I mean, everything, we've been saying it. So we knew that this was long coming, but sadly, this was not very well explained to the common person. When you look at how much it is that we're talking about here being used to fund, I mean, if we were to take the NSA at his words, 83 billion naira. This is grievous.
People ask, can that be?
83 billion naira for a protest? Wouldn't that money have been better used if there were not any other? Yeah, for a purpose that would assuage whatever it was that was leading to the protest. So, isn't that? Shouldn't we be more circumspect whenever it is that there is a genuine cause, but at the same time, when we hear that, some funding is going to come into it, shouldn't there be a little more circumspection?
Thank you very much, Mark. So I think it sends a very troubling signal. So beyond just those funds coming in, sends a signal of the people not satisfied. So those in diaspora, if all those money came from diaspora and they were able to send in that much, those monies would have been used for several other things in the country. So for people to feed, for people to infrastructure, so many things. But for us to have 83 billion naira.
That's the allegation.
So yes, that's the allegation. So let's take the NSA by its word. So if that funding is coming in, it shows that a good number of persons are concerned about the issues. And there is no breakdown of if this funding is coming from Nigerians or non-Nigerians. So there are lots of people out there that are out of this country and they are hoping that the country gets better, that they come back. So such people would be doing anything to make sure, beyond just changing government. So it's not about changing government. So when you say changing government, it's not, so the protest was about changing, it's about bad governance. So rather than changing government, we're looking at changing bad governance, issues around bad governance. How do we put good governance in place?
I'm not sure you, my apologies.
Yes.
I'm not sure you understand the question that Malpa is asking. If we can raise 84 billion naira, some of it comes in foreign currency, to fund...
Crypto, more specifically.
Yes. Yeah. To fund a protest. Were we waiting for protests to raise that kind of money for developmental purposes? What if we decided, okay, let's do a GoFundMe for people living in multidimensional poverty? We can say, okay, we don't want to do government work for it, but we've always known that government work is not just government work. I'm just trying to piggyback on the question Mark asked you. What if that money had been raised? So, okay, immediately after these protests, these are the developmental initiatives to which we want to put this 84 billion naira.
So, the amount that Nigerians in diaspora send to the country alone is the second highest earner of our foreign exchange in the country. So on its own, it's large, it's huge. So it would not stop that source of fund coming in. So even if you, like you said, will not take the responsibility of government, and that amount coming in would have been used to, like I said, feed people, unemployment.
For how long? Feed people for how many days?
The fundamental question is, we've got government, and government has got to put its processes in place that would ensure that the issues of running of government is smooth. Why would we get individuals? Okay, let's go down memory lane. So it's about social contracts, right? So man, woman was in the state of nature, and they're like, oh, and the state of nature was anarchy, chaos, and all of that. And they decided to move from state of nature to civil society. Civil society then came, not civil society organization, civil society then came, oh, for us to be in civil society, we need a government to be able to take responsibility and take care of us. And in turn, we give all our loyalty, obedience to the government for making rules, for security, for police, army, currency, including knowledge. What I learned, the government determines that. But in turn, the government then does two things, welfare and protection of lives and property. So that's the responsibility of government. So the citizens then have an obligation to hold the government accountable if they are not providing these two things. And if increasingly you are saying that this current government is telling us that the last administration failed. They've said it several times. They said, oh, the Buhari administration left a bad economy, so that's a sign of failure. And we kept waiting. We waited for 8 years. So should we keep waiting? Should citizens keep waiting? And the indices is not getting better. So there's a narrative that, oh, it's going to get worse until it gets better. So at what point do the citizens then come and say, oh, we are holding our government accountable? At what point do we then say, we go to the streets and we air our grievances in holding our government accountable?
Two things. Just a moment. While citizens, hold their governments accountable, we also know that things do not happen in a vacuum. Right now, we know that countries are interconnected. There have been theories around how some countries are at an advantage, some are at a disadvantage, and in some instances, some want that status quo of countries at a disadvantage to continue to stay the same. And there are countries in whose interest it is that African countries never prosper. It is in their interest that African countries remain in a state of disarray so that they can come in and exploit resources. These are things that we have heard. I'm sure that you have also heard this as well. Whenever it is that protests are, legitimate reasons, I mean, who can stop citizens from complaining when price of ordinary goods have tripled their prices, things that, used to be within the reach of the average person. Even rich people complain these days getting it. Of course it is within the rights, but don't they also have a responsibility to exercise circumspection to ensure that, protests, genuine protests, are not hijacked by interests which do not exactly wish us well?
Yeah, if you want to look at who's responsible to ensure that the protest is not hijacked, so I agree, there will be interested parties that will take advantage of this. So from the IMF, the World Bank, that we think mean us good, they don't mean us good. We see it everywhere. So with the amounts that's the loans and all of that that's given to us, and how the amount we pay back, and how the SAP, all coming from history, where we have been through and all that. So we have not seen the positive impact of these Bretton Woods institutions, how they've worked for us. Countries like US at the point spend up to $2 billion a day subsidizing agriculture, but World Bank comes and says you cannot subsidize anything in your country. So every country subsidizes one thing or the other. Yeah, so there are debates around, do they actually mean us well? But of course, our leaders want resources, so they have to dance to their tune and all that. So if the country goes south, more south, do they stand to benefit more? Definitely, we're importing all of these things from them. By the time you get your whole act together, you'll be able to reduce and minimize that. It affects their own economy. But clearly, who has the responsibility to make sure that the protest is done harmoniously, there are no issues? I think it's both ways. So as civil society, for instance, you're not going to call out protests and say, people come out and let's burn down the country. No, it's one country, it's one united country, right? But it is the responsibility of the government, more of the responsibility of the government, to ensure that the protest is peaceful. You can determine and say, you have to follow these routes in your protest. You can determine and say, but I don't think
we saw that. We saw an example of
going to the stadium is a different case.
Why is it different?
It's a different case. So where in the world have you seen people say, oh, go to a secluded environment? We have places for protest. So we have Unity Fountain, we have Millennium Park, we have those kind of places. People can come there, air their grievances, but they are also allowed to walk. They can walk. Why do you think the Parliament Square was built? Why do we have such a big space there with the thumb and her fist in the Parliament? Why do we have that? It is for protest. So National Assembly
That's a specific place.
Yeah, for protest, yes. So, but they would not allow citizens go there because, again, citizens can go wild. The protesters might go wild. We do not support violent protests. So definitely nobody supports that. Neither do we support looting. The government needs to differentiate that, but the government has a responsibility. If citizens want to protest, in UN, on the average, check your records, on the average, you have 4 to 5 protests every day in the UN headquarters in New York. Every day you have 4 to 5.
That's a designated place.
Different locations around the UN facility. So you have different people, different groups protesting different things. So today you will see them
do people have to move around, or do protesters have to move around for protests to have been deemed successful?
No. So in the southeast, so they sit at home order is a form of protest. So though it might be forced on them, but it's a form of protest. So citizens can say, today we are not going to work. We are sitting at home. Oh. That's a protest. Wow. So we can say, oh, today, by 12 noon today, everybody go to your car, start pressing your horn, and start hitting a plate. That's a protest. So you have different ways.
Happen in various ways.
Various ways of protest. So, but on the street is not just the only way we protest, definitely.
But there's something you mentioned the other time about the Bretton Woods institutions taking advantage of certain vulnerabilities. Now, doesn't that in any way for you question patriotism of the inside sources, so to speak, that are used to foment these activities? Because if you know that the idea of these, Bretton Woods institutions is to make sure you don't develop so that they can take advantage of you, how is that able to happen if we are patriotic as a people?
But increasingly, we have seen our government dine with them constantly. So how do you stop the government? Or how do you get the government?
Let's decrypt it, because I like to decrypt this whole government thing.
Yes.
So when we say government, there are 3 arms of government.
Yes.
And there are more than almost 1,500 ministries, departments, and agencies of the federal government of Nigeria alone. There are 36 states with their own state government, 774 local governments in the country. So when we say government, which?
Executive. So led by the executive. So you have the executive, and you have also
federal, states.
The executive, starting from the federal government has the statutory response. So when it comes to external engagements, the federal government, of course, takes responsibility in that. So before Lagos State government gets a loan from the World Bank, they have to get a sign-up from the executive, the federal executive, right? And they have to have a sign-up from the parliament. So those two, at the minimum, must be responsible. So the judiciary is only brought in when there are issues or questions. So like, we need to go to court. So judiciary is also brought in. But primarily in order of preference, so it's first of all the executive. They are the ones that design the plan. And like, this is what we want for our implementation plan. And we need to take the amount of loan. But constantly, the government sees the executive immediately, who are the ones that develop and implement the plan. They see the Bretton Woods institution as great partners. Sometimes they could be partners to them. Of course, they provide those resources. But the aftermath of those, the effect of those on the economy. And what we ask the Bretton Woods institution is, we are quick to give out these resources, but we are not able to empower and get citizens to hold their government accountable on how these resources are used. Loan in itself is not a bad thing. So don't get us wrong. We're not saying that, government shouldn't get loan. But we have been on this journey for years, and we are still not out of it. We're not saying that, the country gets better. I'm giving you the example of the last 8 years. So do we want to wait another 4 years? Or like, let's give this current government a bit of time. Yes, I agree. We'll give them a bit of time. But what happens during the week, by Monday, you will have a clear clue. So by the time the government is saying we want to buy 2 presidential jets, you are building or finishing the vice president's residence with 16 billion naira. So those kind of expenditures send a wrong signal. So if the government expanding, so you are starting with expanding your cabinet, you are creating an additional ministry and this is the largest ministerial this we have had in a long while. So actually in the history of the country, actually. So if you are doing those, then the citizens will think that you've got enough resources, you've got this covered. So they will then place those demands, and by the time people are still hungry and all that, of course they will ask questions.
The second thing my apologies. The second thing that comes to me from that is, so let me just take your perspective on that as well, because we've talked about it a number of times. You reminded us the other time of the multidimensionally poor people as far as the 2022 report is concerned. 133 million Nigerians.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that would sound vague to a good number of people. For instance, in Kano, there are 10.51 million people as of 2022 that are multidimensionally poor. Yobe has 3.23. So can we decrypt it to those states? Because the states also get resources from the federal government, and they also have their own internally generated revenue. And it would seem like to a large extent, no one is asking them, how are you spending this money? Everyone looks to the federal government, calls out the federal government, but no one is calling to the state government. So it would seem like, okay, the states are just dodging behind the federal government to take the flak. So are we cutting them some slack?
No, definitely not.
So how are we holding them accountable?
So the protest did not just happen at the federal level, also at FCT. It happened across the country.
But I don't remember anyone calling the name of the governor.
No, they were calling out the governor. So right now we're calling out the president, the governors, and even the local government. So thank God we have a bit of local government autonomy.
And National Assembly members.
Of course, National Assembly members. So we're calling out all arms of government. So I don't think we're separating. It's not a case of, we heard some governors saying that, it's the federal government that is responsible. That is not true. So that is not true. That's not the position of citizens or civil society organizations. So that's not true. The truth is that it's all across the board. So the federal government of course always takes the brunt because they are in the leadership position. They take that whole leadership space. And if you let's look at the truck of rice that was shared. You mentioned the multidimensional poverty. So if you use the number of the truck of rice, the number of people living in poverty, 133 million, and the 20 trucks that was shared across for each state that was shared across the country, on the average, you know what? You know what a model of rice is? A model of rice is about 1.25 kg. 1.25 kg. If you share it equally among the 133 million across the country with the number of people living in multidimensional poverty, 6 persons will be sharing a model of rice. That is how bad it is. So those little stopgap measures, which came from the federal government, it is expected that the states would complement it. We're not saying that social protection issues, they are very critical, they are important, but they are not long-term measures. We should look at long-term measures.
Do you think the states played any role in adding to that purse, that's storage?
To the story? Yes, I think they definitely, in terms of the resources will be shared between, in terms of the resources used to get that, resources will be shared between the states, the federal, the state, and the local government. They definitely contributed to that. But they can do more. The states can do way more. We need to hold the state.
So how do we hold the state governments responsible? So because until the states, before an issue can get to the federal government, it must have been out of the control of the people in the states that, look, I'm feeling this too much. And if, as you noted, the states are pointing to the federal government, the people are going to go there.
The federal government also has a role to play there. Did we do so much to get local government autonomy, some form of local government autonomy we have right now? Who did that? The federal government. The president had to use his power, his position, and went through the court and got it done. So if the federal government wants to get the people, so this whole route we're going of criminalizing protests, making it look evil, is not a good thing for the country. So it also stops people from being able to hold their state governments and local government accountable. So it's not a good thing. But the federal government can play that facilitative role to ensure that the citizens, so by publishing the resources, by being accountable in their own stance. So as an organization, as ActionAid, we make sure that we come to the board clean. We make sure that we are accountable. We are also transparent in all that we do. So that when it comes to tax, 100%, so that when we are holding government accountable, we know that if the federal government wants to play that role, that facilitative role, then the federal government has to be very accountable, very open, and then encourage citizens to hold their state governments accountable. But clearly, what we see is, the federal government, the legislatures, the state governments, they are, for us, it's about they are the ones benefiting. So the Council of State. So when you look at the Council of State, who are those that are there? Somehow they benefit from the status quo. But the status quo, the way it is right now, we've got to do something, or else at some point it will just not hold anymore.
Well, only recently, ActionAid also held its own policy, I think it's policy plan for the next how many years now?
10 years.
For the next
Strategy.
10 years. Yeah. Do you want to tell us the areas of advocacy that you will be focusing on?
Okay, so for us, it's ActionAid is looking at the next 10 years to be able to mobilize Nigerians in contributing to getting 5 million Nigerians out of poverty. So 5 million Nigerians, the biggest issue that's facing us is issues of poverty, of course, and inequality. And if we're able to, the last government, President Buhari's government, said we're going to get 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in 10 years. So, but for us, we are looking at contributing to 5 million Nigerians in 10 years, actively working with citizens. Of course, we're going to work with various stakeholders, the government, the private sector. Of course, the media is a critical actor in all of this. And the way we are doing it is through citizens organizing, citizens mobilizing. We have this group called the Smallholder Women Farmers, made up of over 2 million smallholder farmers that we are working with, actively working with, and looking at the challenges, the issues that affect them. Recently, we did a survey with them that shows that 70% of them said that two things that affect them drastically in terms of their input, that affects up to 50% of their production, is insecurity in farms. They're not able to go to farms, so that affects 50% of their production. And the second one was issues of loans and access to credit facility. Those 72% and 73% respectively. So clearly, those kind of group of people, we want to work with them. And if you're able to get those kind of majority of people out of poverty, women, young persons, and persons with disability, those are the three critical groups that we are focusing on to help get out of poverty, to work with to get out of poverty. But we can't do this alone. We're going to be working with groups, movements, and groups. So you will see us more on the streets. So that's an assurance. So you're going to see us more on the streets, and we're going to be asking more critical questions because of the system of government that we have agreed to practice, and we must hold our government accountable.
So if I get you right, when the Council of State says the protest is a regime change attempt, clearly you don't buy that.
No, I don't.
So what they should do then is that you can't paint everybody with one brush.
That's it.
As much as there are people who may have done things untoward, they should distill those people from genuine people who came out to protest. So that's the bottom line.
100%. So identify those people, handle them. They are criminals. They'll go to court and deal with it. But do not say because of a few persons, what's the proportion? Is it the job to 50%? If it's just 10%, it's easy to identify them. So they've identified some accounts and all of that. So you investigate those accounts. I hope they are not wrongly tagged. That's another thing.
Yeah,
so they're not wrongly tagged.
We've not been able to ask them questions about this narrative that they're talking about, the crypto funds, the funds they say they traced. I think 4 billion traced to Kano, Abuja, Katsina political bigwigs. So who are these bigwigs? Did they have any political agreements with them before time?
Yeah.
We don't
Can I
know.
ask a question? Our current president funded protests in the past. So I think that was legitimate. I don't think that was legitimate.
So, Mr. NSA, do you consider that as sponsoring protests? Was that tantamount to regime change at that time too? So, questions, Mr. NSA. Thank you for coming on. Andrew Mamadou is the country director, ActionAid Nigeria.